good day to everyone. To everyone who has come here today, I wholeheartedly welcome all of you to Idam Reframing Content, a collaborative design workshop. To begin with, I welcome our chief guest, the eminent and the most humble architect Kevin Mark Law, architect of the Small Project Malaysia, who was ever so ready to be a part of our workshop as a mentor and a guide. Moving forward to an eventful and knowledgeable 3 days under your guidance, it is a pleasure to welcome you, sir. Next, I welcome all the architects who accepted our invitation, understood our efforts and motives, and are here today to be a part of our workshop. We have with us today architect Stendal Kumar Dos from Play Architecture, architect Garcia Governance from RCB Architecture, architect Abid Ranjit from R&B Architects, architect Praveen Ramachandran from Southwest Corner, architect Krishna Verma from Mr. Verma Architects, Dr. Sauni R from Studio Commune, architect Vishnu K from Studio Commune, architect Gadadri from Recycle Bin, architect Vijay John Matthew from Cochin Creative Collective, architect Vivek Venugopal from Design Tribe, architect Rishi John from Design Tribe, architect Niranjan CW from Studio Ego, architect Gilo CP, assistant professor at Avenue Institute of Design, architect Indo Valley from Habitat Technology Group, architect Ajay Jacob from Thinking Dwelling Studio, architect Gautam Shashidharan from Tav Architects, architect Danya K from Damodar Architects, and architect Vinod Sakaria, assistant professor at Canton. Last but never the least, I welcome our head of the department, Professor Sheeta KP, our teaching and non-teaching staff, and all the students who have gathered here. Welcome one and all. Now I call upon the head of the department, Professor Sheeta KP, to address the gathering.
Respected Chief Guest of the Day, Architect Kevin Marklow, Dean UG Studies, Professor Shadi TL, practicing architects, and my dear colleagues and my dear students. So this collaborative 3-day workshop, Idam, is an initiative and ardent effort of the 2013-18 batch. And this is the first of its kind happening in the department. And this is actually the dream of this batch, which is they've made it come true today. And this is the batch which has brought in glory to the department by winning the NASA overall 2016. And I think this is the batch who has learned to glorify the name of this department. Actually, I was very apprehensive when they came up with such an idea of a 3-day workshop because it's the first of its kind happening here. But I think they've showed me how they could coordinate and make it successful. So I'm very happy for that, and I'm very happy, and the students are very fortunate. The architects and the department is very fortunate to have a very humble architect like architect Kevin Marklow in this midst for this occasion. He is actually, I had a talk with one of my friends. She had called me today morning. So I asked her, she is from Malaysia. So I was asking her regarding, I told her that architect Kevin has come to our department for a workshop here. So she was telling me that he is actually the gem of Malaysia. So you can call him the gem of Malaysia, and he is actually a very humble person, and you're very fortunate to bring him to this department and have a workshop for the students, and who is the apt person for today's architecture. So that was her remark, and she is telling that she also follows his principles in her design. And he is also an academician who is and also a practicing architect. That is one thing which is very good about him. And he is visiting faculty for many universities in Malaysia. Like she was telling me, he is also a guest faculty for the Taylor's University in Malaysia. So we are very happy to have you here, sir, and we welcome on behalf of the department, on behalf of myself, I welcome architect Kevin Markler to this occasion. Then the students have given a different outlook for the workshop. They have brought in different architects from all over the place and who are very much interested in working with the design. So I also welcome all the architects who have come from other places to attend this workshop and to make it a grand success. And again, the student architects who are involved in the workshop also, I welcome all of them. And again, I don't have much to tell about this because you can actually watch it up and see the events and the difference what the students can get out of this workshop. So I congratulate the effort which has been taken by the students and the coordinator of this Idam workshop, Professor Jinoj, who has behind this for the past 2 months for making this fruitful. So, and this being a prelude to their farewell, which is on 4th, this will be actually a new venture for the department, and this will always be a message to our junior batches also. Hope everything comes out well and successful. And these are my prayers, and all the best and all full success for this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We are greatly humbled by your words. Simon Edmund says, to place is to architecture as meaning is to language. In a setting such as Thiruvananthapuram, a tapestry of seamlessly interwoven layers, the idea of place extends beyond the geoclimatic to socio-political and the historical. Or does it? What is context? Why is it relevant? What is your definition of context? To ponder these questions, we, the graduating batch of 2013-2018, bring to you Idam, Reframing the Context.
Situated at India's southwestern end, the capital city of Kerala, Thiruvananthapuram, is composite and cosmopolitan in character. The princely state, founded by its ruler Martandavarma, emerged as a prime intellectual and artistic center. Now, the largest city in the state is rich with an evolving architectural lineage, low-lying coastal hills and commercial passageways. Over this bustling city rises 3 main buildings forming the protagonists of our story. An iconic 19th century monument, the Napier Museum, the post-independent modernist statement, the Students' Union Building, and a poetically composed structure, the Center for Development Studies. A fitting baseline for all 3 interpretations of context is the palace complex at Padmanabhapuram, built between 17th and 18th century. A plain blank wall envelops the complex, hiding myriads of structures in a minimalistic manner. The whole complex appears woven together a series of visual, oral, and thermal arguments about climate, place, and society. The incrementally cumulated structures of the palace complex connect through semi-open passages and courtyards. The fenestrated hallways and passages filtering light and air and yet guarding privacy retain a dominant architectural frame for understanding context. The Napier Museum, named after the British Governor General, is symbolic of complicated politics combining the regional with a strong Western influence. The space it encloses, the nature of the building envelope, and the penetrable interiors with fenestrations makes the attempt to recreate aspects of the Indo-Saracenic, a valid framing of the context. The overpowering superstructure, the bold pitched roof, the color and the clever pattern on the surface, and rigid symmetry add to the character of the building. The formal nature of its axial entry highlights its monumentality. The progressive confidence of post-independent Kerala is reflected in the architectural style of the Students' Union building, built in 1969. It is unapologetically modern with its side entrance and a porch supported on a single circular column. The lobby that encloses the main staircase, a courtyard with a series of rooms around, and a connecting corridor offers an argument about environmental control, lifestyle, and materiality. Sited below the road level and offering a long horizontal facade, the precast concrete jalis open permanently to the outside, hiding a second membrane of glazed operable windows. A critical reframing offered by Laurie Baker, the Center for Development Studies, attempts to harmonize his radical argument within public institutional structures. The building combines influences from English vernacular and regional forms. It merges into the undulating terrain, taking shape around existing features. The interior spaces are exposed to nature in varying degrees, a wide array of fenestration typologies. The well-crafted brick jalis, load-bearing, undulating half-brick thick walls, and the formal sequence of entry with informal spaces offer a unique example of this kind. Our attempts to reframe the context with reference to these four precedents is intended to engage a few broad questions through the specifics of architecture design.
With this, we officially will begin our journey. Now I invite architect Kevin Law to take over the session.
I wasn't gonna. Can you hear me? Is this working all right? Am I got it right? Just gonna tuck it inside. Yeah, is that better? Yes. Is that better? Am I projecting well enough? Maybe you can turn up the volume. Sorry, I spilled some water on my shirt earlier. I wasn't going to give you a presentation, and then I wasn't, and then now I am because it's big enough. I think it's a small enough room. But before I kick off into that, I want to talk about, and this is addressed to everyone, not just the students. You ever had this experience? You're working on this project that you're so damn good about, and then your instructor comes up to you, your lecturer, and says, "This is absolutely crap work. You're gonna fail. Carry on. You're gonna fail. You're doing absolute rubbish." And then someone else comes along, whom is another lecturer, and says at a review, it says, my God, this is fantastic. You didn't change a thing, and it's fantastic, you're going to get an A. In fact, I'm going to recommend you get an A. Have you ever had this experience? We all have. Have you ever wondered, what is it all about? Is it all subject to women fancy? What? Who's to gauge who's right and who's wrong, right? And you see, this has got all to do with the opinion, right? The opinion, the point of view. And everyone is entitled to their point of view because, you know, everyone's point of view is valid. Is it? So anyway, you're looking at this, that's your point of view. It's not it's not what you're seeing. What I'm seeing is actually this. This is my point of view. Who is right and who's wrong? What about that point of view? Yeah? The problem is, we are too dependent on opinions which mean absolutely nothing. An opinion just tells you about one point of view, to the neglect of all the others, and especially the odd ones, you know, which actually tell you how two points of view relate. Opinions mean nothing because all they constitute are viral points of viewpoints, when what actually is important is when you elevate it all by understanding as many viewpoints as possible, and more importantly, how they relate to each other. Epistemology is understanding the relationship between multiple viewpoints. Okay? Now, when enough people believe in the same viewpoint without understanding the multiple viewpoints any one issue or thing is about, you have what is called the dominant paradigm. Dominant paradigms are not about the truth. They're just about what most people believe, right? It's another less polite term is herd mentality. Right now, we're living in an age of architecture, and I don't mean just in India, I mean globally, where all the points of views that we believe, and the multiple ones as well, exclude the most important viewpoint, the most marginalized viewpoint of all, and that's this viewpoint. Not to neglect the other viewpoint that this is all about, which is this one. We're living in an age of the viral formal viewpoint. Almost everything, and this is no insult to what you've done, because all of you have done a great job, but everything we saw in the slides regarding context were formal understandings of context. Even the names we give the styles, who cares whether it's traditional or modern? It's still about form. And whether those forms served everyone, or only they served the masters and kept the slaves hidden, but the word seen, remains the same in the world we live. We design drains as though we don't care whether would you design a drain any differently if you knew your mother was cleaning it? But we don't give a crap because it's someone else's mother. We design, even Khan, with this amazing layering of spaces and serve space, unknown to him, created even more divides between us as people, because you've got the area where the servants occupy, and then the served spaces where the masters rule. So, through default, architecture has been governed by our obsession with how things look, how beautiful things look. Now, while that might be fine in Bollywood, which is not a critical source of information nor discourse, it's not right for architecture. So, what I want to talk about today, at least the way I like to reframe context, is to get away from the formal one and all its viral viewpoints, because we haven't even understood the way all these multiple viral viewpoints about form correlate. I like to reframe context by talking about that other marginalized aspect of it, which is not about use. You might think this is about use, it's not. And I'll try to explain to the slides. Can we have a full frame so you don't see the, sorry about that. I'd like to talk about the last great architectural competition the world has ever seen. It was started back in 1991. Some of you students weren't born yet, were you? And the reason why it's the last great architectural competition is because the jury weren't made of architects, who are arguably the least competent people to judge an architectural competition. The client was Commerce Bank, who was at the time one of the world's biggest banks. And they want to do a corporate headquarters in Frankfurt, which is their birthplace. And they invited 8 architects around the world to submit entries, out of which only 2 were shortlisted. The jury were made up of very interesting, a lot of specialists. They were psychologists, they were critical social critics, they were historians, they were clinical psychologists as well. And the 2 shortlisted entries, sorry, this is Frankfurt. Oops. It's not working very well. The pointer is working very well. Anyway, well, we fixed that. The 2 shortlisted entries were by an English architect and a German one. The English architect was Sir Norman Foster at the time. He hadn't become a lord yet. The building made him a lord. And the German architects were Christoph Ingenhoven. You may or may not remember them. The older architects will. And they were the first 2 architects to really, not really popularize, but really work on that double skin glazing. Back in the 90s, it was not necessarily groundbreaking, but it was just beginning to take hold of the world, double skin glazing. The 2 entries, if the slide change doesn't work, it's okay. I can go on without the slides. I just thought it would be easier. Don't worry about it. Turn it up. It's fine. Turn it up. The 2 entries couldn't have been more different one from the next. Should we wait? Maybe I should do an interpretive dance for reframing the Okay, I tell you what. We're going to sit down. I'll just work it from here. I don't not like doing that because my brain stops working when my legs stop moving. So I try not to be in the same spot all the time. That's why that's so important, But I'll try to do my best. Okay, so that's Frankfurt. Oh, that's Frankfurt right there. Never mind. The 2 entries, that's okay. I think I probably messed up. The 2 entries couldn't have been more different one from the next. The entry by Christoph Ingenhoven was a remarkable transparent ellipse. The thickness of with a central core, the thickness of the structural slabs cantilevered to a 50mm edge from 500mm thick slabs by means of this amazing extrusion, which incorporated louvers to allow hot air out during the summer and keep cold air away during the winter. It had a reveal for Venetian blinds to prevent glare from coming in. It had this amazing environmental control system which allowed the air inside to be trapped during winter, and it had these wonderful frames on the inside to open both from the top and from the side in order for the double wall skin space to be maintained during those times of the year. And most importantly, Ingenhoven asked the question of what image, what a bank would want best to look like. The board members would want the bank to best look like. And so he figured transparency. Wow. That is a powerful concept, isn't it? Transparency. What bank would not want that for their corporate image? Well, the Ugly Project 1. The Ugly Project 1, it's ugly from every view you look at it. It's ugly from the Kaiserplatz in front. It's ugly from the Servicestrasse behind, from the park next door, from real up close, and from the bridge to the park across the river. It's one of the ugliest buildings. It's the ugliest building Foster has ever designed before it sits. Even the artwork inside is ugly. But behind all that ugliness lies a secret that I'd like to tell you about today. The reason why it serves as the model for the greatest architectural competition the world has ever seen. You see, to begin with, at a scale of detail, instead of spending all that money on this incredible bespoke extrusion and a huge amount of money to cantilever those structural slabs all the way out, Foster used a basic post and beam lintel system, which makes his building really ugly because then you got to hide all that ugly structure. You got spandrel panels, and it just looks, just pretty nasty. Kind of like this right now. You can't see my legs. But everything he did for the windows and the double wall skin works in exactly the same way. You've got the little gaps which allow the cool air in and the hot air out during summer. You close them up during winter. He's got Venetian blinds he bought from the same hardware store, which is just hung in between the double wall skin so the glare doesn't come in. And the windows open both up and down and sideways for easy maintenance of the space. So he accomplished the same thing, but, well, his building doesn't look pretty. At the level of the urban planning realm, Foster recognized the fact that the Frankfurt public were using the existing site as a shortcut through from the Kaiserplatz in front to the Silberstrasse behind. So he maintained it in his ground floor plan by bringing members of the public right through the banking hall. This is not 16.9. This has been stretched out, hasn't it? It's 16.9 here. It's like over there, and then so it's going to mess up with my floor plans. But anyway, we can't do about that. Never mind. Sorry. At the level of massing, the building actually spirals up in three kind of distinct towers. There's a low bank, there's a higher bank, and there's a big bank right facing south. And what he did was, instead of putting two faces to face south, he put one main bank, the tallest one, facing south, because over the course of a winter's day, that big mass would generate the total thermal gain of more than the combination of the two smaller floor plans. There wouldn't be enough time for those for thermal mass to work in that way during winter. So even at the level of the massing, did Foster, the simple thing of north, south, east, and west, did Foster pay attention to? Now, you'd be forgiven for believing that it's a triangle, and over here it's not really a triangle, it's a bit more like a bullet, right? But anyway, it's not, because what Foster did was he cut out a wedge and then a triangle out of that wedge out in the middle, which meant that the chimney could be used for the Venturi effect, drawing in cool air during the summer, venting out at the top by means of the chimney effect, and then the cooler winds get rolled in through all the building scale windows. Basically, he followed the client's brief, which asked for a corporate village rather than a corporate tower, and arranged 3-4 floors of every department together to share one large space of a shared garden balcony. And what this means was, during summer, when the sun is high, windows are allowed to open, not so much heat gain, hot air escapes, cool air gets drawn in. During winter, windows are closed, lower summer, winter sun, and the trees and the inner spaces get more sunlight during the day. And then Foster did something pretty remarkable. He, for every department of 4 floors, it can't be more than 4 floors, because once you get to 5 floors, you cease to engage in human scale, and it ceases to be a village. 4 floors is as high as you can get. So every 4 floors, he rotated the building 120 degrees. 4 more floors, he rotated the building 120 degrees. 4 more floors, the 120 degrees. Which meant that by the time you got back to the same view, it's a completely different view. You're like 12, 16 stories higher. It's the first time in the history of the profession that orientation was brought to bear in a high-rise tower. There had been a mistaken belief that Gordon Bunshaft did it first. He's the other, undeserving Pritzker Prize winner. Sorry, a bit more about that later. But Gordon Bunshaft didn't do this really. So it's claimed he did it in this bank in the UAE. But in actual fact, his collection of floors were close to 10 stories. You have absolutely no sense of orientation, and more importantly, no sense of village in that kind of configuration. Never mind the fact that his building looked a lot more beautiful than Foster's building. But now for the kicker. You see, you know how it is when you're in a nice part of the Western Ghat and you've got this amazing view in front of you and you take a photograph. And that photograph, I mean, in your head, it's just gorgeous. And then you put it up on Instagram or Facebook and it looks like crap. It just looks flat. You know that feeling? And then your friends going, okay. The reason is because your eyeball is able to do something a wide angle camera lens cannot. Your eyeball is able to take the panorama in relation to the foreground, in relation to your immediate context. And taking that measure means you're able to appreciate the panorama it is, because it's only in appreciating it to the small space you're standing in that it becomes a panorama. You can kind of try to do that with a telephoto lens, but a telephoto lens eliminates the broad scope that a wide angle gives you. So what happens over here, where in normal office buildings, the worst views are always in the middle because there are no views. It's where all the serfs and the Dalits and all the people like you and me work, right? And then the bosses all sit in these offices outside. In the case of this building, the best views are all on the inside of the V, because you get a special view inside your community through the garden and out that building scale window of your village to the city beyond. The worst views are on the outside because all you have is a sheet of curtain wall coming straight down the floor. Most people are too afraid to get close to that because, vertigo. So they stay away from it, and all they get is this one single dimensional view of the city. Now the problem with this is, if you want a room with a view in Foster's building, you sacrifice your privacy because someone on the upper floor can look down on you and at the pornography you're surfing during working hours. With a single move, Foster turned German corporate privacy entirely on its head. You want an office with a good view? You deal with privacy in a different way. Foster did not ask the question of how his building could look in order to deliver the transparency that every brand wants to be branded by. He made that transparency happen by virtue of new relationships he created through the configuration of his building. Everything we know about, no wonder you guys could do anything, it's the wrong presentation, never mind. Anything you know about architecture and design can be, maybe we should just turn this off. Can be distilled into these two examples. One example begins with the inspiration of form itself, transparency. And everything that follows after that is merely a parody of what that transparency looked like in the beginning. Another form of creativity begins with the substance of content. And content is intangible by nature. There is no form, shape, size, quality of light, texture to content. Content is the very substance that drives form itself. Form can't drive form because you end up just imitating the thing that inspired what you were trying to do. So everything that you do after that, if you first begin the act of design or of architecture through the inspiration of form, becomes a mere parody of that initial form you started with. To wrap up, I'd like to talk to you about this parable in a way. It's a story of what I call the seashell and the sea. Two architects who asked to design different phases of the same aquarium. And the first architect asked what his aquarium could look like. And he stumbled upon this wonderful image of the multi-chambered nautilus seashell that's supposedly a living fossil. And upon dissecting it, found that this shell was arranged in a Fibonacci series with its chambers spiraling to the smallest little chambers in the middle to regulate its balance and float in water. And upon graphically depicting it, found that you could enter his aquarium on the outer biggest spiral experience all these amazing tanks of different sizes, going to the smallest ones in the middle, which held the smallest marine life, and exit on the inner spiral of his aquarium. Wonderful sense of circulation, fantastic sense of spaces, and well, looking pretty much like a bloody seashell. The second architect instead asked what an aquarium is. And she discovered that the aquarium is about the sea. And upon research on that, found that the sea was about high tides and low tides. It was about the most luminous shallows of the Maldives, about the deepest trenches and shadows of the Marianas of the coast of the Philippines. It was about the most delicate ecosystems known to man and human beings, about the most powerful forces of waves and currents on the planet that actually power our weather systems. She found us about sunrises and sunsets and about the food chain. And her aquarium became something beyond a single word and beyond a single name. It opened on some days of the week before the sun rose, opened or closed on many days of the month after the sun set. It had tanks in it so shallow that children could walk through those tanks and feel fish nibbling at their feet. And a tank so deep, you had to get into an elevator to descend 250 meters underground to understand the true meaning of the word treasure. It had tanks with water inside that rose and fell according to the rising and falling of the tides outside, and tanks that brought the weather inside, so you could experience whether it was raining or the sun was shining, even though you were inside the aquarium. Everything you do that's creative in life can begin in only one of two ways. You can be inspired by the form that someone else has made. You can be inspired that the forms God has made, natural forms. I think it's called biophilic architecture. You can be inspired by how things look. But the moment you do that, you're engaging with something called styling. It's not design. On the other hand, you could begin with the inspiration of content, which then begins the act of design, because content has no form. The sea has no form, unless you reduce it to a seashell or a shark or some silly grains of sand or a pebble. Content is about everything having to do with intangibles. It's got to do with the specificity of in each and every context that you are a guest or a visitor to. And it involves the discovery of questions and problems specific to those contexts that you are engaging for an intervention. Styling, on the other hand, has everything to do with tangibles. It's got everything to do with the crafting, the shaping, the sizing of space and solids itself. Everything to do with texture and the quality of light, and everything that we believe architecture has been about for the past 100 years. And it's about solutions and answers. It's about a method of production. And what we've been studying in schools around the world, and I don't just mean India, I do mean the oldest architectural schools in the world, which include MIT, Harvard, the most revered schools in the world, which include the AA and the Bartlett, have been teaching styling rather than form. But don't take my word for it. Let this be absorbed and understand why I feel a very deep need to reframe context for ourselves. That when you begin with the substance of form as your source of inspiration, you will merely produce parodies of what that source of inspiration is all about. You think that an airport's about flying, your airport's going to look like a city bird or an airplane wing. Instead of what airports are really all about, which is about walking. Because you only understand that if you yourself are a 92-year-old or you have a mother who's 92 years old. Design only gets you somewhere and means anything at all if you make it deeply personal. And there's a bunch more things I want to say, but let's just end there, and maybe we can have some discourse about this, questions, disputes, if need be. But just to round off, I feel that it's vital that this workshop focuses not so much on form itself, because that'll just make you either a traditionalist or a modernist, which is such a silly debate. You're still on the same side of the river, you know? Or worse still, in the river, fighting the flow of dead fish flowing downstream, because you know only dead fish will go with the flow, and only stupid people fight that flow of dead fish by swimming upstream. I think it's time we got ourselves out of that river itself. Get away from that bloody riverbank and do work when no one's watching. Because the moment you have an audience, it destroys the very act of your processing that work itself. So that's it. Let's have some questions if you, or discussion if you feel the need to. Fourth year students in Chennai were a lot more engaging than you guys are. Or is this too much to handle? Like, oh my God, for 100 years, what are you talking about? What about Corbusier? What about Frank Lloyd Wright? Who here has got had Zaha Hadid as their favorite architect? Don't be shy. Hands up. Anyone else? Come on. You guys are shamed. Okay, 3 of you. How many of you guys like Justin Bieber? Some of his music's pretty good, right? Okay. Have any of you studied any of Zaha Hadid's work, the ones that like her work? You have. Which one?
I really like the geometry, the process in which she thinks more than the building.
You loved her geometry form. How many of you like Peter Zumthor's work? Which buildings have you studied that make you believe that his work is good? Which one? Colombo Museum. What about it specifically is good?
It's difficult to say good and bad. The experience of the space and what is spoken about.
The experience of the space, the quality of life. Almost religious. So special and beautiful. Okay, what else?
No, the way he juxtaposed what existed as a history, and on top of that, he had a new intervention.
That's right. What he juxtaposed of history, old form, and what he did, was new form. Form and form. No, tell me one more. What else? What else did you enjoy about what he did?
Okay, this I have to explain it, but the experience I've had walking through the streets of Cologne and then waiting for the Colombo Museum to open while I was starting sketching the building itself, which was tucked in between so many other buildings and did not really, unless I knew that it was Peter Zumthor or it was a famous building, I would have really noticed it. And I really liked the fact that it wasn't being noticed much. And then while standing on the road, trying to feel it, when you stand next to a wall and touch it and feel it, and then you enter and you're introduced to the building through what were the remains of the older church, and I can't remember what it was. I guess it was a church.
Yeah.
And something that was burnt out, and then you have something on top of it which is art, which is contemporary art, which was quite conflicting to the spirit of a church, quote unquote. So what I enjoyed was not really the space, not really the religious or the feeling spiritual inside, but it invoked in me quite a number of conflicts and questions. I believe any creation that can raise questions within you is a good work.
Mind you, those questions are all to do with form itself. Everything you need to let it soak in. Everything you spoke about had to do with form and how things looked. You didn't notice it before. It was not something that looked special. It was.
Just continuing on Peter Zumthor, I visited a couple of his works where he works in Kur, in Switzerland, and the Guggenheim House is one of the small houses. Peter Zumthor has been celebrated for a lot of things, but I have sort of a love-hate thing for him, especially because of my association with Switzerland, so I had to sort of intervene. whatever his formal quality of life, whatever the binaries that you're presenting here of us versus them, form versus of the evil, rest. But he comes from a very rooted Swiss culture of waste not, want not. So if you know the Swiss culture of how mundane they are, actually how boring they are, in a way, he truly represents that culture in the architecture that he conveys. There's a lot of debate that can, on formalistic physiognomic way of dissecting it. We could go on over each other. But he does represent that culture, that very mundane, boring sort of culture, and brings it to an architecture of just the bare, minimum, but not in a brutalist way. That maybe comes from an alpine setting or whatever that bucolic sort of setting that he comes from. So it's this sort of pastoral brutalism or whatever you can. I just made that up, but
Indo-Saranic pastoralism is still form.
yeah, it's still.
I'm not saying that you're wrong. You're absolutely correct in your analysis.
No, it's just a way of understanding it through form. That's all.
Yes, but you see.
But that's not necessarily evil.
No, it's not. I'm not saying that form is a bad thing. I mean, without form, we won't have architecture.
Exactly.
So why are we obsessing about it? Every critique I've ever heard about Zulko, about Rem Koolhaas, about Zaha Hadid, about Liebschied, about any famous architect I have ever heard of, has always been in terms of how it looked. And names given to justify, legitimize. You're shaking your head. Tell me why. Tell me in what way when you explain Columba that was not about form. Or the craft
See, as Christian rightly said, I don't think it's about form or non-form or metaphysical side of it. It is, I think it's very personal because
yeah, like art, but it's architecture.
No. The point that I'm trying to make here is when I visited Columba Museum in a particular state of mind or certain set of experiences, my perception of Columba Museum is unique. And the second time I go there, it might be something else altogether. And that's where I want to quote the example of the Peter Eisenman's Jewish Museum. No, what is that? Jewish Museum. So I've been there more than 2 times. That's Lipskid. The other one was Memorial for the... Yeah, that's Memorial, yeah. So I've been there 3 times. And every time, the first time I went, I enjoyed it. The second time I went, I hated it. So the point that I'm trying to make here is it's not really about the binary of form or the non-form, but it's about a very personal experience of.
But the trouble is, every one of those personal experiences still come back to form itself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not negating your right to have a personal experience about architecture. It's just nothing new. That's what we all bank on. You have to visit that building to understand it. You can't understand it if you don't experience it. Well, I've heard that till this day. I want to challenge us by reframing everything you think you know about architecture. And I believe you will come to that same conclusion because it's always been about form, even the Jewish Museum. Liebschied asked the question of what the Jewish Museum isn't about supposed to be about the Holocaust, mind you. It's about the Jewish culture. He reduced everything about the Jewish culture, everything about the way they eat, about the way they dress, about the music they produce, about the amazing intelligence they have, about the absolute cruelty they're now exhibiting towards the Palestinians, to one single moment in history where they didn't have any control over what their future was going to be about, the Holocaust. That is tragic question to ask of a museum that's supposed to represent a culture. It's shocking. And so his form ends up being one that looks like shards of glass, the staccato of bullet shots, the hollowness and emptiness of the loss. What a mind-numbing way to view an entire culture. This is what architecture has brought us to. It's about stylistic references to certain things that popular culture can all identify. The Holocaust. And reducing an entire meaning of an entire world to one moment in history where that culture has absolutely no control over their own destiny. That's shocking.
Sorry, I have to comment on this. you think Picasso's Guernica is also a similar thing, or the Spanish
Ah.
movie?
Picasso is a whole other equation. Picasso was the master of the brand. He almost invented the brand. But doesn't mean he's not great. But in any architect's or artist's life, they're only capable of one great work in a lifetime. Any more than that, you're God. And we're not. We're human beings. The only difference between you and a famous architect is that they're better at branding themselves than you are. And it's time you stop iconizing people. Oh, Kevin Marlowe, let's stand up. It's time you stop putting so much mindless effort to obsessing about architects and the ridiculous things they do, and start using your intelligence to question it. What are we taught in schools for case studies and precedent studies? You study them for all the successes, right? For all the things they did right. And what have you been taught your whole lives by your parents and grandparents that know the best? You never learn from success, you only learn from failure. Because when you look at a solution and a success, it represents an answer. Which means you just cut and paste that bloody thing into your own world. That's not design, that's cut and paste. That is the hallmark of styling. Case studies have been taught around the world incorrectly for the past 100 years. And I mean in the AA, the Harvard, MIT, Harvard, the most stored institutions you can imagine. Yeah? And we are living in an age of the dominant paradigm. Without knowing any better about the actual truth of something, we believe it. Because something cannot be in the front page of a magazine if it isn't great. And that's a lie. Because words and branding is used to disguise the truth of what buildings and people do not do. Just one example before we need to move on to the workshop, don't we? One more example, just if I were to give you all a choice between having for free every single device the Apple company makes from today till the day you die, you can do whatever you want with it. You can have 2 of these. Or paid access to the World Wide Web, meaning every month you've got to fork out, I don't know, 1,500 rupees for paid access to the World Wide Web. What will your answer be? What will your choice be? It's a no-brainer, right? And then smiling. It's a no-brainer. Of course you pick the World Wide Web. What fool? You can't use any of those devices without the World Wide Web. Who designed the World Wide Web? You see, we're living today in a world where people that make money, stuff, and a name for themselves are valued and iconized over those that make an actual difference. The guy who designed the World Wide Web was a man called Tim Berners-Lee. He was an English nerd in a Swiss lab who gave his invention to the world for free when he realized how powerful it was. There were many iterations of that before. He was the first one to recognize its potential and to do something about it. And what he did was not to patent it, which means the world had access to it for free. And that's a paradigm which draws home the point that what we know about architecture and the architectural network is pathetically little. And what we've been educated as architects our entire lives has been style rather than design. Don't take my word for it. Start studying the buildings and understand that fine distinction or blatant distinction between what is form and what is content. It will change your world forever. It'll help you understand which of your teachers are more form obsessed and will critique your work because it doesn't look the way they want it to look. And which teachers are actually more interested in content, which is about the creation of new relationships between people. New dynamic, powerful relationships between you and me, breaking down the true walls which famous architects were constantly erected in the fight against deeper awareness and intelligence. Thanks very much. Maybe we should kick off into the workshop. And please keep this in mind during all your studies of the workshop. I think what we should do next is when we go to the site, examine the neighborhood you're affecting. Because those neighbors have lived there for a lot longer than you're going to be intervening. And they're as much your clients as your client, which is the student union. And we all talk about community projects, don't we? the ones that you take on after you've done your high rises and your institutional buildings, and the ones that got on the front page of the semi-pornographic architectural magazines of the world. But every project you take on is a community project because every site you adopt sits within an existing community. And I think we've forgotten this very basic thing. Would you like a 50-story building built next to your grandmother's 2-story house? And yet, architects do that all the time because it's someone else's grandmother's house. So who gives a crap? I think it's time we started giving a shit. Thanks very much, and let's move on to more important things.
I hope you guys feel the fire here. I think the 3-day workshop is worth it. And now we have come to the conclusion of the introductory session. I hope you guys keep this fire throughout this workshop and beyond. Some thoughts are going to change, some perceptions are going to go into a debate, but I think this is the most interesting part. Now I request all the architects to move towards the thesis, the design workshop studio. You will be guided by the organizers and the participants who are participating for the workshop below. Please move down towards the design workshop studio. All the other non-participants and volunteers, please stay back for a small meeting. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming once again and welcome to the workshop, Idam Reframing Context.